How do you then handle this conversation, knowing what you know? Right now we are talking to parents who will be thinking that very thing. Like, I'm just not going to let my kid have a smartphone, go online, play video games, do whatever, because it's just too dangerous. It's too far. It's too Wild Westy.
And we're big fans of the delay approach. In fact, we have a little mini campaign called Delay is the Way. But here's the thing. Delay is not a no tech strategy, Nathan. It's a slow tech strategy. See, I think there's a big difference between sort of living in the, call it, nirvana sort of place that you can just prevent your kids from having all technology. So one of the things that we say to parents is, it's fine if you've said no, but educate them as if you've said yes.
Welcome to the Gospel Tech Podcast, a resource for parents who are feeling outpaced and overwhelmed as they raise children in a tech world. As an educator, parent, and tech user, I want to equip parents with the tools, resources, and confidence they need to raise kids who love God and use tech. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Gospel Tech Podcast. My name is Nathan Sutherland, and today we have with us Chris McKenna of Protect Young Eyes. Thank you, Chris, for joining us.
You're welcome. Hey, Nathan.
Chris, I'm going to let you do a little bit of your own intro, but Protect Young Eyes is an amazing organization where you guys make resources for families to basically raise up healthy youth in a tech world, which is what this podcast is all about. So I've been a fan of yours. Yeah, I've been a fan of yours for a while. I'm really excited about both the resources you guys are doing, but really the way you're going about it. So would you tell us a little bit about yourself and about just yourself, your life, how you got to the spot, but also about what Protect Young Eyes is doing for families?
You bet. So Nathan, I'm a CPA. What the heck am I doing in the tech space, right? So I, for 12 years, was a consultant with Ernst and Young. Lord called me into full-time ministry. So I left corporate America and jumped into junior high ministry because they're a perfect complement to each other.
That's right? Natural.
Isn't that exactly what you do? Go from spreadsheets to silly string. So I did that for 7 years, but it was the timing of that which became so opportunistic. It was from 2009 to 2016, which I call the rise of portable internet. That's when kids started carrying the internet with them. Therefore, parents had questions. So I dig back into my problem-solving consulting background, and I just simply started doing research for parents. Hey, Chris, tell me about this new Snapchat app. Tell me about this new Instagram app. If you can imagine a world where those are true statements, right?
Yeah.
But that was ministry, and parents were clueless about it. And culture and childhood started to change at a blurring pace. And so we just really began to meet that need, quite honestly. It started with a closed Facebook group that led to the launching of protectyoungeyes.com website in May of 2015. And from there, the Lord does what the Lord has done. And we've grown from there. We're a small team, but we travel the country. We do hundreds of presentations. We work on the legislative side. And I want to stand in that gap between the awesome families, right? I'm going to guess that those listening to this, you are families who care about how your children consume technology. And yet, a disproportionately large size of the burden that it takes to protect kids online today has been placed on parents and children. And those who have all the influence, the ability, and the resources to do certain really intuitive things aren't doing those things. And that's at the legislative and at the corporate level. And so, frankly, Nathan, I want to stand in that gap. Protect Young Eyes sits in between amazing parents who want to raise kids, who learn how to use technology in a good, honorable, God-honoring way, and big tech organizations that frankly don't care at all about the safety and protection of our children. They don't. I've looked them in the eye. I know who they are, and they don't care. So we want to stand in that gap to try to make that possible with resources. Frankly, I wish I wasn't necessary.
Yeah.
Right? You don't need a company right now in 2022 that goes around and does presentations about how to protect children on bicycles. Why? Because we've built children's bicycles that are appropriate for children. We have equipment that makes them safer for children. In other words, we've removed all the inherent risk around buying bicycles for children because we've actually designed them for children. we currently live in a world where we have designed technologies that are by their default nature exploitive of human beings, and you have to actually hunt for protection. That should not be the way. We should be able to pick up devices that inherently don't harm humans. And if I want to hurt myself on it, that should have to be what I go and search for. I should have to go download something that harms me instead of downloading something that helps me.
Yeah, you gotta veer for the wall.
Right. Right.
Right. That shouldn't be the default, is that you're always headed towards the wall.
Exactly. So you're totally picking up what I'm dropping. We want to help, and kind of the missional level, our statement is we show families, schools, and churches how to create safer digital spaces. That's what we stand for.
Yeah, that's huge. And that touches on so many things. So there's at least three things I want to talk about. The first question is always like, well, how are you doing that? But I'm actually going to bump that to our third. The second is, could you give some tangible, practical examples? Because you mentioned, hey, these tech companies don't care about you. They don't care about your children because you're actually part of the way they make the revenue. If you could elucidate on that. And then the third will be, you are a generally tech positive person, and I would love to know how one can remain tech positive with all the things you just said. So if you would return to, let's go to how are these big companies? And if you gave us a snapshot, because this is an area that I actually have to be careful. Like when I present with families, I have to be careful on how deep I delve here, because it can spiral quickly. Both I can start to like just focus on negative and like doom and gloom and like the world is ending. Sure. I get very Chicken Little in this conversation. But also many parents start there. They just assume like tech is bad, but they don't really know why. It's just kind of like I don't know if it's got a screen, if it plugs into a wall, it's evil. Can you walk us through some of those practical ways of how are these exploiting our behaviors and our children and our minds?
So there's a difference here. And yes, because I speak to those same parents, there's an element of technology that I'm sure that many of your listeners and my followers would just sort of have an inherent dislike for at the adult censorship level, right? Let's just call that what it is, right? So we kind of put that over here. But I'm trying to have a different conversation, and that is, what does the child protection angle look like? And I'm trying to find that balance between privacy, protection, and freedom that we all long for. Yeah. How can we create legislation that is a barrier tall enough to protect children, tall enough to protect marginalized families, tall enough to protect children who don't have families who care about their digital well-being, yet low enough for families who want to make decisions of their own, or adults who want to step over that barrier in order to exercise their First Amendment rights to do what they want to do online, right? Yeah. So whether it's age verification, I mean, my gosh, Nathan, I have to sign a two-sided waiver here to let my kid go climb a wall at Boy Scouts on Monday night. And all the information, this is real, right? That I have to put on this just to let my 12-year-old son, Cole, who is capable and able, climb up a wall with his friends. Yet right now on a device, which is sometimes issued by the school, he could find pornography, which can lead to trauma, which can lead to all, right? So the barriers that are non-existent when it comes to what is scientifically proven as harmful content to developing brains don't exist. Right. I simply want to create some of those barriers for those brains. Let adults, I don't love that adults sometimes do the things that they do, but at the same time, my focus is on protecting minors. We protect minors. Why? Because minors have vulnerabilities that adults don't. So that's the focus. And you look at the legislative landscape, the last law that was passed that protects children online, Nathan, was the Children's Online Privacy and Protection Act, which was passed in 1999, 4 years before MySpace. And it was then that we determined that age 13 was the right age at which somebody could have what they call PII, personally identifiable information, collected from them for marketing purposes. It was never an age of social media. It was never an age for anything else. And yet it's been widely interpreted now for the past 23 years to imply that 13 is when a child is ready for everything that this godlike algorithm wants to place in front of it. And I'm simply here to say, stop the train. If 13 was the right age 4 years before MySpace based on digital risk, what should the right age for digital adulthood be today? Let's just agree it's older than 13.
Yeah.
So those are the conversations that we are very much part of. I don't want to be a part of them, but I've just determined that I want my legacy to be in those spaces so that we can scale what we do family to family. I want to scale that to protect more of those vulnerable children from those places.
And I mean, to wrap our brains around 1999, I was a sophomore in high school. My family had 28K dial-up on a shared landline with
That's
five
right.
children. Right.
That's
So
right.
if I was trying to play Warcraft 2 with my friend and my sister picked up the right, like that was, we had one line, it was shared, right? Like that was 1999 when this law was put into place. I mean, in that season, like if you wanted to go find something dangerous online, it took time. Like it took effort, it took dedication, and it took a some kind of a shared device that's plugged into a wall and a cord. There's no hiding somewhere else with the wireless internet. So those are the rules, and that's kind of your passion. And I think a wonderful reorientation when you say, hey, or to the question of what are we talking about when we're saying unsafe, you're not even talking like, hey, that app or that game has behavioral design in it, which is intended to take your focus or your income or your time. You're saying, no, like just the safety mechanism, the Wild West of the internet is such a low barrier. It's like those, whenever you take those mountain pass roads and the wall's like 5 inches tall and you're like, that's not going to stop anyone.
Not,
What
no.
is that? Yeah. So you're just saying you're trying to get the wall built up higher so that technology that we use on a daily basis that our kids have access to, whether through school or through our family, can be like a bicycle. It can be something they can enjoy safely without it being a 6-lane highway they're always riding into.
That's right. Just make it age appropriate. Like every other physical thing or place where kids spend time, why do we design with the opposite mindset in places where I believe they can actually do more harm to their life than some of those physical places, to be honest.
Man, all right, I'm going to put this in. So I taught middle school for 11 years. I'm going to put this on your brain because one of my major frustrations as an educator was our district made a digital swap, which was, there's a lot of arguments to why you would move to laptops and iPads, et cetera. Our head of technology did an amazing job making sure we picked devices. So we didn't go with Chromebooks, for example, because Google was collecting student data. And he's like, we're not going to let that happen, even though Google will give you the whole suite if you just agree to run their suite, and they'll give you all the devices because they're just absolutely harvesting minors' data, which we'll deal with that in 10 years when that comes up. But there is no educational device. Like my students, we had this huge issue where Minecraft came on these because Microsoft paid billions of dollars for Minecraft. And so I would, the example that just is burned into my brain is we were studying in January To Build a Fire by Jack London, which is a story of a dude freezing to death in the Yukon, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So if you go and tell your students, hey, open up To Build a Fire, it's a PDF in the shared folder, and one tab over is Minecraft, like you lose that fight 9 out of 10 times with the middle school boy. And it was so frustrating to walk around the class one day and be like, I have half of my 33 students like on Minecraft right now. Like that drives me bonkers. Like Minecraft can be wonderful, but this is it at its worst is when you can't bring your brain away. And so it ended up that the district did a forced push uninstall, that they literally had to go and from the district level, delete Minecraft from 5,000 laptops. And there is no learning device. I mean, the reason I brought that up is there is no educational device. We still do our research through Google in schools. Yeah, just open up Google and check that out. I'm like, there are a lot of subjects we don't want our kids just Googling, but that are important to learn about, right? Like that we should be doing actual research. Like that's not how we want our adults to be informed either, based on where they live and what their search history is and what their purchasing habits are. Like, here's the search result you get. So that is super exciting. I guess that ties in directly then with our second question all right, I'm going the second, which was the third I asked originally. How do you remain optimistic in that world when you watch at least $3 trillion companies design and develop and excel from not having safe habits? I mean, look at Instagram. They're like, get told by Senate, you need parental controls. And they're like, great, we're going to make some. And it is I don't know how you would categorize it. In my opinion, the most laughable of attempts at parental controls of like, we did only what you told us to do, right? Like we didn't do anything else. So when you have that, how do you remain optimistic in this world without starting to spiral the drain?
Well, we have a lot of history to show that this type of change is difficult. Now, there's some things that are apples to apples and some things that are not. My history as a CPA consultant, Ernst and Young. So my primary job, Nathan, was to help organizations become compliant in the wake of the Enron disaster, right? Where Enron, bunch of fraud, Sarbanes-Oxley Act comes out, basically created personal liability for CEOs and CFOs who submit fraudulent financial statements to the SEC. Okay. So what happened? There were not laws in place for decades, and something blew up and happened. And then a law was put in place that actually made individuals personally liable. And then amazingly, we haven't had Enron happen again. Why? Because now there's accountability. So what we are still, and we may be close, we're waiting for the tipping point that will cause both public opinion and legislative action to start to sync up in order to create movement. Now, the one thing that is different with this issue compared with every other issue is out there. And, I'm a guy who, typically doesn't shy away from much. Maybe for the first time in history, we have a subject that needs to be reined in legislatively that our legislators don't understand. Right? We used to live in a space where it was something, corporate America was broken in some way. And there were enough people, either in the Senate or the House, that maybe were in that industry, understood that industry, whatever it was, that they could do more faster because they understood the issues. Yeah. We live in a time where there are probably people that I can count on one hand inside of Google that maybe even understand what the algorithm is doing, or maybe inside of Apple who really know like the core of whatever, so the issues, the technology, the complexity is understood by so few people that those who we have charged to actually hold the bad actors accountable by creating laws that hold bad actors accountable, they simply don't understand the problems. So what is causing this particular issue, be it accountability for bad actors of technology, is we're working so much harder on the education side to educate those with the power and the influence to truly understand the issues than we've had to with other problems in our industrialized history, if that makes sense. Yeah. So it's naturally going to move a little bit slower, but I have got to believe that, man, we are getting close. And I just, I tend to be a glass half full kind of guy. And we're going to keep pressing on. And I'm going to remain optimistic until I don't.
Yeah. So then when you talk to parents, because you mentioned before, there are parents who are right, there's their toes over the ledge, looking down, going, you know what? Technology is not worth it for my kid. Like, we are going to just get as far away from this as possible because it's just not worth the fact the bicycle hasn't been designed for them yet. Like, it'll be my parents with trampolines growing up, right? Before they figured out you could just attach a net to it. And all of a sudden the trampoline's the coolest thing on the planet. When I was being raised, I was convinced that if you jump on a trampoline, you effectively die immediately because that's what you yeah, I was convinced of that. So how do you then handle this conversation, knowing what you know? Right now we are talking to parents who will be thinking that very thing. Like, I'm just not going to let my kid have a smartphone, go online, play video games, do whatever, because it's just too dangerous. It's too far. It's too Wild Westy.
And we're big fans of the delay approach. In fact, we have a little mini campaign called Delay is the Way. But here's the thing. Delay is not a no tech strategy, Nathan. It's a slow tech strategy. Okay. See, I think there's a big difference between sort of living in the call it, nirvana sort of place that you can just prevent your kids from having all technology. So one of the things that we say to parents is, it's fine if you've said no, but educate them as if you've said yes. Because it may be that your child can't have Snapchat or your child can't have TikTok, but I guarantee they still have doorways to TikTok that you have not even thought of. Yeah. They're going to watch that content. They're going to have friends who have devices that have access to apps that your kid isn't allowed to have. And so it comes back to that relational side, to kind of educate and scaffold around them and be with them and do tech. So that's our, our digital trust framework that we have developed over the past 7 years and 1,400 presentations around, like, copy me, right? And there's age appropriate. There's a preschool version of what I'm about to say. There's a middle school, elementary, middle, and a high school version. But, in general, there are 5 attributes that we've observed in families who tend to have kids who eventually learn how to use technology well. And if you're a family who wants to delay, great, but I still think it's important to have your kids see you using technology well. That's the copy me. And then co-play being that even if they can't have their own smartphone, maybe you sit down with them and watch something on your smartphones. So you're doing technology together, because I want kids to know from the very beginning, Nathan, that tech is a we activity and not a me activity, because one-on-one with tech, whether you are 4, 14, or 40, you eventually lose to that monster. It will find a way, it'll find a weakness, whether it's gambling or food or Candy Crush or fantasy football or pornography or whatever it is.
Yeah.
It will find a hook, it'll find a chink in the armor. And I don't care how much you love Jesus, you will find yourself one-on-one with tech eventually losing that battle. So I want kids to know from the beginning that this is something we do with each other as often as possible. And then, an attitude of curiosity and conversation and coaching. These are things that all families, whether you've said no, slow, or go, all families, I think, that embody these 5 attributes in an age-appropriate way tend to have kids who, use technology in a good, self, family, and God-honoring way. And so that's what we would say to that family. I am a big fan of delay. I'm all about it. My daughter, who I have 4 kids, 17, 12, 12, and 10. So girl, boy, boy, boy. So we're 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade, and 11th grade right now. So my oldest daughter, she got her first smartphone at 15. And that's exactly, 15 or 16 is when my sons will, get their own smartphone. Right now, my 12-year-old son, he has a Gab watch that he uses maybe 10% of the time. My son, Blake, he'll go over, he's 10, he'll go over to his friend's house. He doesn't take a device with him. He doesn't need to take a device with him. I'm going to call this kid's dad if I need something. And I know enough about that house, the same way that my parents used to need to know whether or not the house I'm going to had Showtime, Cinemax, or HBO when I was growing up. Yep. My kid, any house that my kid goes to, the first question I ask is about their router. Do they have a router with Wi-Fi that has parental controls? That's the new HBO question, or the new MTV question, or whatever was going to rot my brain back in the 1980s, right? The second question I ask is, are there any unfiltered devices in the house?
Yeah.
Right. And so these are just—
walk our families through what you mean. So when you say router, some people's brains just completely went blank, because
Right.
they were like, I don't, do we have one of those? What is the router?
Is that the same as a modem? Like, yeah, what is that? Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So like how would you describe it quickly so someone could recognize one, or where could we send them that they could see what you're talking about? And then the second piece, the same. When you say unfiltered devices, just walk through a quick explanation of what that would look like.
Of course. Well, the first thing I'm going to tell them to do is they're going to go to your show notes and they're going to click on that link that I'm going to send you, Nathan, which is a link to our ultimate router guide, right? Your router is— that's right. The router is the thing. Oh, good. Thank you. It is, it's doing what it says it does. It routes this signal around your house to ensure that different devices have access to this thing we call the internet, which is, probably through a cable to your wall, which maybe is attached to a modem, and you're going, holy cow, I thought those were the same or different. This article, will explain all of that, because maybe you were given a router by your internet service provider. For a lot of people, that's reality. So Chris, what does that mean? That's explained. Or in my case, I was given a modem, which takes that analog cable signal and turns it into something digital that my devices can use. And I was able to buy a router of my own, the Griffin router, that then routes my devices to use that digital signal. And that Griffin router then has an app. I have a Griffin app on my phone. I can shut down the smart TV in my living room from the airport in Atlanta if I want to, or Seattle if I come and visit you, right? That's the type of control that I'm looking for, because that Wi-Fi layer in our 5 layers of digital protection, Nathan, the router is the most important digital device in every single home. And in most of the homes that I talk to, parents have no idea what that means. So I'm trying to solve that problem.
And if they have internet wirelessly and it's not coming from their cell provider is what we're talking about. So if your smart TV can connect to the internet, if your Xbox connects to the internet without a cable plugged in the back of it, you have a router somewhere.
You have a router somewhere, and maybe your router and your modem are the same thing, but you have something that is allowing a device that doesn't have a cellular data plan. You just name the things, right? I mean, heck, these days the Ring is connected, right? Your
Nest,
your refrigerator, your Nest, your Google Home, how many things?
Light bulbs.
They're all connected to the Wi-Fi. I mean, I can control my sprinklers here in my yard through the app that's connected to my wireless, box in the garage. It's crazy. So that's what we say to families, especially with smart TVs these days, which, as you know, are really just kind of big smartphones attached to the wall. They have apps and streaming. And I can watch Twitch on the Fire TV, which are gamers live streaming. Like it's just like YouTube on my, it's crazy.
And there's a search engine. Like there's a full-on search engine.
That's right.
Yeah.
So we want to stop it at the source.
So you're going to ask, hey, do you have a protected router on your home when your child, 12-year-old, goes over wearing their smartwatch? Because you're going to call the house directly and talk to the adults in the house when you have a question. And then you say, are there any unfiltered devices? And is there another link we can send people on this, by the way?
Yeah. So I just did if people follow us on social media,
which is
Facebook, just at Protect Young Eyes.
Okay.
If they go to Facebook or Instagram, I have a reel that was a video then on Facebook that was how to prepare your kids to hang out with other kids who have different digital rules. Okay. So I went through 4 things that we want our kids to be prepared for. But the part 2 to that, which is coming out next, is going to be this conversation, which is, hey, tell me about the router. Hey, do you have unprotected devices? And then honestly, Nathan, you know what else I want to know? I want to know if there are older siblings in the house.
Yeah.
Now, I know that sounds a little bit weird, maybe a little bit creepy, but in the digital age, what that often means is those older siblings have digital devices that have data plans that don't rely on the Wi-Fi in the house. Therefore, that to me creates greater digital risk in that house, that there is something that could be slightly less controlled. So I'm just trying to, as a former risk assessment guy from my Ernst and Young days, everything to me is trying to mitigate risk. Yeah. I can't mitigate all of it, but whether I'm sending my kids off on a 5-mile hike with Cub Scouts or down the road to the house of the neighbor, I'm looking at that from a risk perspective. And those are the sorts of questions that help me get a sense of the digital risk in that home, knowing that it honestly only takes one traumatic experience on a pornographic website to radically change the trajectory of my son's life. It's worth the questions.
It is worth the questions. And I absolutely love, just those 3 points, right? The router, unfiltered devices, and do we have older siblings who are going to be around? Because that is, and it helps then broach the conversation. Well, no, but like so-and-so is coming over, they're bringing their own device. This isn't always even friends' houses, right? This is Christmas with the family, when one family's like, hey, we don't do smartphones before 15. And the other family's like, we gave them at 9. And it can be this real serious contention. Or you have the older cousins, right? The 17-year-old cousin showed up and brought their PS5 and is playing whatever game they're playing with whatever language is there. And like having those conversations can be big. Which I think right at the end of that, you put your finger on, yes, we can talk tech and big tech companies and algorithms and design, but at the end of the day, I think most of us understand the gravity of pornography, because I think most of us know someone or have experienced ourselves the weight of that struggle, of that mistake, and that it's no longer the same bag of chips it was even 20 years ago. Right, 1999, pornography was a different world, yet alone 4K, yet alone mobile devices, yet alone Wi-Fi, all the places you go. And your statement is how many of us understand the research and the experience. This singular exposure, which average age right now is 11. So we're talking middle of elementary school, average age for exposure. And we know the gravity of it. We know it comes through these devices. We know that it's probably a when, not an if, that our children will run into this. bus, strangers, friends, other people's internet, the public library, whatever happens, a kid is going to find out, what is that conversation look like? What does that conversation, I guess, look like? To not have it be, oh my gosh, I have to make sure it stops because I know the damage. I felt it myself. How do we lovingly step into that in a proactive, hopeful, digital trust mindset?
It starts early. So one of the exercises that I do, Nathan, in the Parent Talks is I'll have everybody write down on their note-taking guide the age when they think they should start the conversation about pornography. And
that's a good question.
Give them about a 5 count, have them kind of write it all down. And then I tell them to cross it off and subtract 2. And then that's probably the right number. Okay. Right. So first of all, it's changing the mindset around this conversation. I want it to be a normal conversation. That freaks parents out. When I say in my talks, I want porn to be the norm, they all go, get this guy out of here. What's he? No, listen. I want that word. I want us to rob the enemy of all of his curiosity power that he has over that word.
Yeah.
And I want us to quit being the ones that infuse fear, shame, and weirdness into something that shouldn't have any shame, fear, or weirdness. I mean, at the end of the day, pornography is a distortion of something beautiful. And if all we do is treat it with shame, fear, and this weirdness, then we actually pollute both sides of this equation. And that is, yes, pornography is a distortion of a beautifully designed act ordained by God between a man and a woman to enjoy. Like, I think we really mess the whole thing up based on our own baggage around this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so I want the conversation to be early. I want it to be wide open. I want it to just be something that you can talk about. And what parents sometimes get when I say something like that is they're like, oh man, I got to make a PowerPoint presentation. It's got to be beautiful. No, listen, if you're driving to school, they don't have to be looking at you. You just say to them, hey, honey, if there's ever anything that happens to you on a screen that you just go, I could never tell mom about that. I want you to know that that's a lie. And there is nothing you could ever tell mom that would change anything about how I feel about you. And then just keep driving. And I'm telling you, Nathan, that was a porn talk.
Yeah.
You never said the word. You didn't get weird. You just simply let them know the door is open, and you called out a lie, that little voice. You called it out and put it out in the light where you can actually deal with it. And then you let them know that it's going to be okay. And I think we underestimate the power of those little drips of influence into our child's life. It doesn't need to be this 2-hour presentation where they applaud afterwards and, oh, I get it. I get porn. I know I get. No. I think drips are a lot more effective than a drowning when it comes to these kinds of things. Over and over again, reminders, I think they're very effective.
And that would be that Proverbs 22:6 of raising our children up in the way they should go. That it is while we rise and when we go out, when we come back, right? Like it's right. As we go about our life, getting those little touches of, I love you. And that love even extends to like these mistakes. And I love you enough that we're not just going to rubber stamp everything you want, because some of that is going to be harmful or self-destructive. And that's encouraging. I hope our listeners hear that these conversations can start early. When you say early, like you talking 5 years old, like how early is early? Just 2 years earlier than we would expect?
Well, if your 5-year-old is riding a school bus, then I hope they know what the word pornography is.
Okay.
So I think it can mean 5. Now, listeners, you know your children better than I do. Okay. But I can almost guarantee it's earlier than you want. And here's the other thing is whenever I ask that question, what's the right age? The age that, adults come up with closely approximates when we think they're going to need it. Yeah. So if you think the average age of exposure to porn is 9, then it'd be pretty rare that someone would just inherently say something other than about 8 or 9, because you go, well, that's about when they need it. But you said something earlier that is really important. And it goes back to, I do a whole 90-minute presentation just on adolescent brain development, because unless you understand what's happening up in the head, you'll never understand what's truly happening down in the hands. There's reasons that they click and tap and watch the things that they do because of what neurologically is going on inside of them. And if you think that in a brain that has a very high sensitivity dopamine reward system and a very low threshold for rational decision making because their prefrontal cortex is not plugged in yet, if you think that developing brain has any chance against high definition streaming pornography, you're wrong. Yeah. I want years of your thoughts and love and care and words and influence and actions and understanding all about this issue and all the other issues that are out there flowing through them so they know exactly what to do when that dopamine rush comes over them. Because it's going to, in the moment, they're going to want to do something else. I mean, we've got to infuse our thoughts in so deep that we actually stand a chance.
Yeah. And get it to be such a hopeful conversation and such an intention. I mean, this is the entire premise of the gospel, right? That it's the loving kindness of the Lord that leads us to repentance, not his justice, which is complete, or his holiness necessarily that is pure. But the kindness that comes out of that as a part of his justice and his righteousness. And that is something we can show our kids, if for no other reason than even if it doesn't stop them. Once they have made the mistake, they recognize the need, right? Like I love that in the prodigal son story. If he's like, wait a minute, my dad literally treats his servants better than this. Like I should what was it that brings the son back? Like this recognition of, I know I've made a mistake, but I recognize redemption is a thing. And for them to be able to at least spot the difference from the darkness they've stepped into from the light they've left, and that value there, which huge. I guess in kind of thinking through that, what does it look like then as a parent to be a digital optimist and operate out of that rather than digital ignorance? And I guess by that, I'm trying to say, believing our children can do the right thing because they've been equipped to do the right thing versus hoping or wishing that it ends up right.
Well, as I did a little bit ago, I mean, when I went through the digital trust framework, those are all things we do. They're not just hopes and dreams, right? And so I think it's through those sort of tangible actions. So like, for example, when I say to parents, hey, I want your kids to know two things. Whenever they see pornography, I want them to know they can put it down and tell someone. And we teach our kids that, to put it down and tell someone. No, we don't just teach them. Moms and dads, I want you to hand your 6-year-old a Chromebook. And I want you to say to them, I want you to imagine right now that you just saw a naked person on this Chromebook. What are you going to do? And there, I want them to actually practice closing the screen and walking over to talk to you. Okay, let's do it again. Here's the Chromebook. I'm going to open it up. I want you to now imagine there's something scary, uncomfortable that you saw in here. I'm going to walk across the room. What did we practice? I want you to practice it right now. Okay, it's up on the screen. What do? Have them put it down and tell someone. And so I want these sorts of things to be more than just my PowerPoint presentation. We want to equip parents who honestly feel at times overwhelmed just with little practical tips. And I feel like that's the lane that we live in, that we tend to do pretty well in at Protect Young Eyes. It's that little 60-second snippet of a tip that I can do that. In its totality, Nathan, in its totality is overwhelming, right? I mean, if you were to just look at the 90-minute presentation we give to parents and try to do all of it, it's overwhelming. So we end all of those talks with, okay, you have a list of things. Here are the 3 things we want you to do. Number 1, I want you to read this blog post about your router and simply ask yourself, should we do something? And then number 2, I want all of your children in the next 48 hours to know beyond any doubt that no matter what they experience online, that they can always land safely and softly with you. That's all you have to do this week. That's it. And so I want to remove some of that fear of, that leads to paralysis that I think sometimes we find ourselves in, especially in a space that we don't understand really well. Because I think every single one of your listeners, it sounds corny, but I truly believe it. I think every single person listening or watching this has digital superpowers. You can do this. You don't need to be a tech expert. You just simply need, I think, to do a few things and you can really make a big difference. And sometimes it's as simple as sitting down with your 14-year-old son and daughter and sharing with them all the things that really freak you out. I've done a video on that, and it is one of the more powerful things that parents have reflected back to me. Like, Chris, that was one of the best things I've ever done, is instead of me sitting on my fears and actually parenting out of a position of fear of what could happen to them, I sat down and over a soda or over ice cream, I kind of laid out all the things that do freak me out about technology. And a couple of things happened. Number one, boy, scripture's right. When you put stuff out in the light, it automatically has less control over you. Boy, look, it worked. And then number two, my son or daughter kind of looked at me and they helped me think through some of that stuff to actually help me, their parent, work through some of those things that I was freaked out about, which then goes back into building digital trust. That part of being a coach is creating rules that they have agency in, they can speak into, because anything they can help own, have agency, automatically is something that they're going to buy into and do. So I don't want parents to live in fear, to be paralyzed. Put it out there, talk to them openly, and you just watch them jump into that and help you through some of that. And it works. Trust me, it works.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's huge. And parents, those are things we can do today, right? We can read that article because it'll be in the show notes, and we can have that conversation with our kids, and they can know that they have a soft landing with us, which I love. And not only that, you have made a number of resources, but one of them is an app for this. To harken back to the early days of the smartphone, there's an app for that. So if there's someone listening to this who is feeling completely, they're listening to this podcast and they may have had to have stopped multiple times to let their brain breathe with the amount of amazing resources you're giving them. There's an app that breaks us into small conversations. Can you tell us a little bit about the Protect app?
Yeah, so COVID took away our ability to be physically with parents. So we built an app to take a lot of what we know. We have, you can go to the Apple App Store or Google Play, just search for Protect Young Eyes, and you'll find the Protect app. It's free to download. And then it has a $4 a month charge, but what comes with that, if you want to unlock all the premium content in there, but it's over 500 little mini lessons. There's 3 different translations of the Bible that you can toggle on. NIV for Catholic listeners, the NABRE, and my old school listeners, there's even the King James Version, if you want to check that on, right? What that'll do is that'll then give you a lens of scripture to view that issue, whether it's cyberbullying or mental well-being or pornography, right? We're big, onto that side. It's bilingual. You can toggle on a Spanish version because I live in Mexico. I enjoy whenever I can helping my non-native speakers whose children maybe are bilingual and parent. Imagine the barrier to guide your kids in the digital age if English isn't your native language, right? So we want to try to break through that and download and check that out, because there's 20 videos in there that if you don't know how to talk to your 6th grader about pornography or your 2nd grader about tricky people, then turn on one of the videos from Allie for 2nd graders. She's a middle schooler who helped me create videos to talk to your 1st grader about these kinds of issues. Or Isaac, who is a college student who helped make some videos that you can speak to 5th graders about pornography, right? You give us, that job of starting the conversation with those videos. Then you're on your smartphone watching a video with your kid, which is building digital trust. And then there's discussion questions to help that formation continue afterwards. So that's what the app is. I would love for parents to download it and check it out.
That's awesome. And they can do that wherever apps are found. They can go to their Google Play Store, Apple App Store, all that stuff. Awesome. Well, that's amazing. Chris, thank you for your time. Thank you for your work as you continue to work with families to help us raise healthy youth in a tech world. I'm super excited for our families to get a chance to hear this and to hear about how they can both use Protect Young Eyes resources, but also be the resource for their kids to raise healthy and hopeful kiddos. So thank you for being here.
You're welcome, Nathan. Take care.
And thank you all for listening to this. If this was encouraging to you, if it was helpful, would you share it with someone? You can copy a link to it. You can just text them the podcast. You can send them to gospeltech.net, where where they can find it for themselves. And would you also check out Chris's resources at Protect Young Eyes? Down in the show notes, as we mentioned before, you're going to find a link to the router article on just how do we set it up, how do we make it safe in our home. Then I also included one just about how do we put parental controls on all of our devices, because it's a really important conversation to have intentionally and to know that we can all do it. We don't have to be tech specialists to be able to be intentional parents in a practical tech world. If you have any questions from today's conversation, you can reach out to me directly, nathan@gospeltech.net, or you can find Anna and I both on social media at LoveGodUseTech on both Instagram and Facebook. And you can join us next week as we continue this conversation about how we can love God and use tech.